podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. So what you're about to hear is actually a conversation on Coach K. There is a special cut of conversation in regards to the very serious matters of what's going on in Ukraine with the Russian invasion there, and a conversation about COVID that I have decided in my creative and editorial prerogative, as it were, to reserve. Yeah. So what you about to hear right now, we're gonna talk a little Coach K. So there's 2 doses of basketball. I know it's a little bit much, but hopefully, there'll be something here, worthy of thought. And as we get back into action, as I get back into action, creatively, hopefully you will give me a bit of grace and a bit of forgiveness if you were waiting. Waiting for those conversations about the other 2 topics, but I guarantee you there will be more to come on both of those. So with that, let's get into it. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
Oh man. So this week or weekend, I guess, right, was Coach K's last game at not last game coaching, but last game coaching at Cameron Indoor Arena. And I guess, probably, I'm sure his folks are definitely happy that, he's walking away, just as, he not passing away. Like, we had a conversation about impact of John Thompson, sometime last year or sometime in the last years. I don't exactly know what time that was.
John Thompson, John Chaney.
Yeah. But, as the only person in my life as a Duke fan, and I don't know if I'm at that. I don't know if I am necessarily negatively Duke, but regardless of all that notwithstanding, right? Coach K, is symbolic and a part of sort of some of the last coaches really of the era that we was maybe young, first introduced to college basketball, in the 80s. And he's finally stepping away, from the game, and all the players that they've coached and the Duke, the kind of the meaning of Duke within the last 30 years, 40 years of basketball. So I thought it'd be fitting maybe to have a Duke basketball, various things related conversation. Then also even just as so there's a lot of little touch points. But I guess one thing that I would want to ask you, what did you actually get to watch the whole game? I didn't get to watch the game, so I kind of tuned in late. And then...
So. I did. I like most, I would say not just Duke fans, but I would argue, frankly, college basketball observers, in some ways, sports observers, was trying to watch the beginning, the kind of the ceremony before. During that time, Texas and Kansas were playing a game, and I guess some folks would call it a barn burner. It speaks to college basketball that, they had to keep it on, but then they had to show this thing, so they had it on split screen, which was interesting. And I watched until about 5 or 6 minutes in the second half, which I then realized that the game was getting out of hand, and to be able to, not have feelings about it, I was able to cut it off and go about my business and go watch a documentary or something. Yeah,
indeed. That's an interesting disappointment, because that's something I definitely do. Well, I mean, I only have one real fan engagement that I actually will feel some sort of way, which is my wayward New York Football Giants, and I go, come on, fellas, let's get this thing together, man. Like, they're like, you know what I need to do? I'm gonna go do something else.
That's right. That's
Let's
right.
go walk away because this is
That's right.
can't let you have my emotions today.
That's right.
Well, I think one of the things that I think is significant, and it's something that we've touched on sometimes. Talk about basketball, college basketball, and NBA basketball, and the degree to which, sort of the mythology of the like hard scrabble kid who lost, young person in basketball was the only way out of the doldrums of the ghetto. You know what I'm saying? Like conversation. Where in reality, a lot of kid guys that make it to the league kind of from, working class, the middle class, largely, what I mean, what one would look at as stable families, right? And I think the knock when we was young, that at least that I absorbed about Duke was that like Duke didn't want players, especially black players that came from so-called troubled families or troubled circumstances, right? And so the perception of black guy players who were on Duke was that, and some sort basically like came to sort of proxy class war of basketball thing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I obviously probably highlighted by the Fab Five and the assumptions about the Fab Five, because we know that like actually most of them had fairly stable, what we wouldn't necessarily characterize as, hard scrabble overall family lives. And even the conversation from the Fab Five doc where Jalen Rose speaks to like his perception of what Grant Hill's life was like, right? Not necessarily the reality of what Grant Hill's life was like or who he was, right? So that dynamic around the Duke program, I don't know how tied in folks were. Actually, oddly enough, when we went down to Durham a couple of years ago, was the first time I ever actually seen Duke's campus. Like, because where I stayed that extra night, if y'all did, I stayed at this other spot that was just south of Duke's campus.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of like, walked around, looked around and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is very interesting. Like all of this, like I can see why like it's like a cloistered, kind of exists. And I don't know if Duke. I know it's a private university. I don't know if it's like a Presbyterian or some kind of, I don't know, has a religious affiliation of any kind.
I think originally, but now it doesn't really function like that. I think it kind of functioned more like you said as a class and like kind of elite education. I mean, so I think your point, which is a bigger point around this stuff, is not, I mean, you're spot on. Especially during that time. I think it's a little different today. I think when people think about basketball today, like no one doesn't think about the fact that Steph Curry's, was a son of a ball player or Klay Thompson is a son of a ball player, or all these guys that now are sons of ball players who grew up in relative comfort, right? We don't have that conversation about them anymore.
Yeah.
I think it was also tied so much to the role of, especially in the early 80s, the role of the NBA. And if you remember Michael Ray Richardson that played for the Nets, and Bernard King and all the guys, remember that, in the initial thing of Showtime, before Showtime was embraced by, frankly, white mainstream culture, right? Where the idea of the Lakers of five dudes running up and down the court, passing the basketball in ways people had never seen, was kind of off-putting, right? And we juxtaposed Boston's play, which also was a false thing because Dennis Johnson was black as all get out. Robert Parrish was black as all get out, right? They had Ernie Maxwell. There was never this idea that like there were not black players on the Boston Celtics. But anyway, like to go back to it, there was this idea, and if you're 45 and down, maybe 50, your juxtaposition of Duke was largely the story of UNLV in Michigan.
Yeah.
Right? First, it was UNLV and the idea of these five basketball players, largely from JUCOs. And again, I think the story of Tarkanian was a story of the conversation of taking young folks who may not have had opportunities,
Right.
and bringing them to the desert, right,
Right.
and and giving them an opportunity, right? And we know that I think there's a lot to be lauded with that, and that we see the challenges that happen with the program, and that's not a shot at Tarkanian. That's a shot at that point. You couldn't bet on nothing, right?
Right.
But you bring these folks, we've adopted all these things that we villainized 20 and 30 years ago. We've adopted and embraced sports gambling. 30 years ago, we didn't embrace sports gambling. So these guys go to Vegas, coming from JUCOs, junior colleges for those, and maybe need some help and stuff like that, right? So if you juxtapose these 5 guys with Tarkanian biting on a towel, right, versus your perception of Coach K and these black players, and then them winning, so it kind of feels like the reverse of the Celtics-Lakers idea, that this system beat the brothers, right?
Yeah.
Or then the flip side of Michigan, and I'm going to talk about this as obscures. We be thinking because the basketball teams were all black that these institutions were down with black people,
right?
Like the University of Michigan, because it was 5 black players, all largely from the Detroit area or the Midwest.
Right. That Michigan was assigning itself we are trying to champion the growth and development of the black community.
Right.
It's they wanted the black players. They because
they didn't always take black players from Detroit. Let's be real. Yeah. Black players from Detroit went a whole bunch of other places. They didn't go to Michigan. I mean, you had same thing only because of them. Yeah, Iverson, Victor Page. Yes, but not the school. Another part I want to bring up here is one of the first recruits that Coach K got was actually Gene Banks from West Philly High School. Right? He was a player of the year, and he went down there. He went down on the team with Jaminski. So Gene Banks and Mike Jaminski were on the same team. And Gene Banks went to West Philadelphia High School, which was no bastion of academic excellence at that particular time. And then if you look at who Duke did take, and this is true, but I would argue this is true with other teams too, they took black kids from Catholic schools. Right? So DC has and still has a very strong network of Catholic schools that black kids go to play ball. That's where he got Johnny Dawkins. That's where he got Tommy Amaker, right? So those were the players he was taking. He was taking players out of DC that went to the Catholic network. But guess what? So was Georgetown.
Yep.
Right? Patrick Ewing came from Cambridge and went to schools up in Cambridge, right? Cambridge, Massachusetts. You know what I mean? The Villanova squad that won in 85. None of them guys were actually from Philly. All of the guys on the 85 squad in Villanova were from Catholic schools or some kind of high school, usually in North Jersey or New York. The whole Big East, largely when we think of the Big East impact, battles, were mostly Catholic school kids across the board from those respective cities. So I think, it was a story. And then because again, going back to this conversation, basketball in that time needed a white savior, right? Or the white press framed basketball as needing a white savior to rescue it from the niggas that was taking it over, right? So what did they do? They created Danny Ferry, right?
Yep.
Next thing was Christian Laettner, right? Next, you know what I mean? Because then the other issue was Bobby Hurley, right? Bobby Hurley being the point guard, the white point guard with vision, right? Which is how we talked about it then. That the white point guard got vision, the black point guards got grit, right? So we had this juxtaposition of Kenny Anderson versus Bob Hurley, right? And then Christian Laettner, because of his attitude and all that, became the white guy that everyone wanted to win. So there was always this larger theme that was put on those Duke teams.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That really reflected it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was always as if like Duke was. I mean, and it's funny that it was always that Duke was sort of. It's interesting that Duke was made to be made. You're made to feel like Duke was always the other side of whatever team you thought was cool. Like, so it was Syracuse. You know what I mean?
Right.
Squads with Derek Coleman and them, and then Sherm Douglas and Billy Owens, or if it was the Michigan, obviously UNLV. And then
Georgia Tech with Kenny Anderson and
Georgia Tech. Then you get. I'm trying to think of like when it, because then it started. I mean, it started to shift, and I always wondered how. I guess maybe it was because of Michael Jordan that like North Carolina somehow avoided being similarly associated. I mean, even given recent activity at North Carolina in terms of Nicole Hannah-Jones, in terms of a place that would maybe we would Duke doesn't, Duke is exclusive. North Carolina obviously it's not necessarily been a place that's always been in any way much more engaging.
Shout out to all. I got all my family that are Tar Heel fans that won't mess with Duke. I get it, but here's the thing: when you look at those Tar Heel teams in the '80s, he wasn't taking the Larry Johnsons of the world. He was taking Rick Fox from Canada.
Yeah.
He just wasn't taking certain players. Like certain teams just were not taking certain people. It doesn't matter what college it was.
Yeah.
Right? Like the colleges that were taking on the guys that were really good, because back then, again, the infrastructure of the AAU teams and all of that to go a little deeper wasn't there. So the dude that was really good, that maybe was betting on games and stuff like that, them guys just, they didn't succeed. Yeah. Today's player, even if they have those issues, have so much more support around them, right? There's someone who came into life a little early and said, listen, man, don't mess the money up. You see what happened to these guys in the 80s.
Right.
They didn't have that infrastructure at that time. But I would argue Indiana, because thinking about the teams from that time, Indiana, North Carolina, Kansas, none of these guys are taking these players we're talking about. None of these guys are doing what John Thompson and John Chaney did, right? Which is also in, as well as HBCU coaches. So it's important to note that.
Mm-hmm.
None of these guys were taking these guys. That's what makes John Thompson, John Chaney so important, that they were taking chances on people. When thinking about Hank Gathers and Bo Kimball, when they come out giving all kind of numbers, they went to Loyola Marymount. They didn't go to one of those. They didn't go to one of the, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's like this idea that we just forget how college basketball and college sports had so much of a kind of a race and class context that Duke fell into. Now, what's interesting is if you look by like 93, Duke is fundamentally different.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to move us to, because they totally shifted, just to the like, look, as I look at it, sort of like the who's going to get the best players, you know what I'm saying, World Series every year. You know what I'm saying? Like they, like them, I mean, Kentucky, I guess, really ran this second wave of that in the what's it, the Calipari era. But so that's a little later, but in 93.
They had a little bit in the Pitino era too. I mean, if you look at Mashburn, I mean, now that Kentucky team that Duke and Kentucky played at the, what I consider to be the greatest basketball game ever played, the Elite Eight game in Philly, which I did actually attend. That's one of them humbugs of time that you could say
that
like
you was there.
Actually there. That I was actually there, hugging everybody in the Duke. I was in the Duke section. A family friend had went to Duke and got tickets.
Right.
And so, but yeah, you had Mashburn, but also them Kentucky teams had a lot of white kids.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of down south white kids.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because in many ways, I'm not 100% sure if college basketball is really that much different than it used to be. I mean, I know more players go to the league and with the rules and stuff, but it doesn't seem in my head. Like when I think about, if you think about it, like if you write it on a piece of paper, like, all right, so if you're telling me the top 50, top 30 players from each year, may not stay for 2 years. But it still seems like it still should be entertaining. Like college basketball doesn't seem like it should be so unentertaining as it is sometimes. Like, and I don't know what happened. Like people tell me, oh, because of the talent. But I'm like, yeah, but it ain't that many. I mean, 30 to 60. I mean, is there like a bigger number that just ain't getting drafted that I'm not tracking? You know what I'm saying? But I'd be thinking that something has changed with it in such a weird way.
You bring up an interesting point. One thing I want to touch on with the Duke thing is again, 94, you get Carlos Boozer, Trajan Langdon, Avery. No, Avery might have came a little later.
Yeah, Avery was later. That was because he
Capel.
Right, Capel.
Right? You get Capel. So Duke in 94, 95 does their first, what I call like their first like black team.
Yeah.
Right. So this is like, they're the first ones like, okay, wow, they got this dude from Alaska. They got these 2 dudes from Alaska, right? that can play basketball.
Right.
Right. And what's the Corey Maggette? But that might be a little later too. But my point here is when you start to think about Duke post 94, 95, you define them largely by black players. You don't define them by white players. It is insightful to remember that Kobe, if he was going to go anywhere, he would have went to Duke for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Webber was supposed to go to
Duke. Yep.
Then we go to Maggette, Elton Brand, Jason Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Now in there you get Reddick, right?
Yep.
In there you get Grayson Allen, you get Luol Deng.
You get
right?
What's his name? Kyle, tall dude. He played in the league for a few years. I can't remember his name, but I think he was in that Avery, one of those teams with Avery and Brand, or after
that time.
Tall, what was his name? It'll come back to me. But
you get the Joneses boys out of Minnesota in a more recent level. You get Jason Tatum, right? You get Marvin Bagley, right? Like, so again, there's this idea of a university based on, frankly, 1986 to 1993. But that shows you how powerful nostalgia is and the power narrative is.
Yeah, because it sticks with you that, like, Coach K and whatever is that sort of adhered to the program and your perception of it. It is that race class challenge, and that this is some sort of counter note to the sullying of the game by, like, open-ended profiteering and whatnot, to the degree that, like, and it's always the rub with college basketball, and I think the high level college basketball, and I think everyone involved, once you're in there, and if you're watching, we're all supposed to suspend. We were all asked to suspend, belief that that all that was happening here was very expensive. Like, there was a lot of money attached to it. Like, we were able to watch and go, no, they're just amateurs, and like the coaches just love the kids, and we just all like watching it because they're like the best ones. But there's none of this is precursor to money being exchanged, or no money is being exchanged of a meaningful note, wrapping around what you're watching when you're watching these games, and Tuesday night basketball, and the game of the week, and what was why can't I say his name? He's a diaper daddy, baby. My guy, I can't say his name.
Yeah, no, Dickie V. Yeah, so like, so yeah, I just think it. To your point, it's fascinating how you have this kind of framing of the enemy, right, based on those years, which again were so formative in the years of people who are now currently sports writers, right? And especially, I would say, Black commentators those were the central years in the identity that anything that was like real black was like your thing, and anything that wasn't black wasn't your thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It again obscure. It's like, no, black players went to a lot of places. Black players went to Ivy League schools. Like it's all, but it also underscored, like you talked about really early, the class dynamic.
Yeah.
That like, again, the class dynamic has been almost obliterated in basketball culture. I would just say in generally basketball culture, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because generally speaking, with the advent of AND1 and AAU, there are no different styles. Like before, you would say, "Oh, that's a DC player," or that's a New York City point guard, or that's a Philadelphia point guard, right? Or that's how Chicago guys play. It's all been obliterated.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone plays like each other because they've all watched videos. So there's no uniqueness per se to a region's game anymore. It's kind of like rap, right? Like there was a place where you said there was a place where the way that people rapped. You don't say that anymore because everyone's watched everyone and listened to each other. It's just a way people play now. Everyone shoots threes. Everyone does the same dribble. Everyone learns the sham god, right? So whereas before it was kind of like New York City point guards played a certain way, right? You like growing up as a kid, when we used to like do New York, Philadelphia games stuff, you knew the New York point guards was coming in doing all kind of tricky stuff with the basketball. That was their thing. Right. The Philly point guards may not have actually did it. They just got the ball up the court. So it was that juxtaposition. You know, the DC guys would shoot the lights out. Like you know what I mean? It was a part of it. You knew the Newark guys were like, they were just going to push the ball and score, right? Mm-hmm. Just none of that. Also important, Kyrie Irving with the dude.
Yeah.
Right. Again, like, so when you start really basing it back, there's like a lot of the stuff that we think had this credibility just no longer has a credibility. Before we jump deep into the game why today, I also want to say, you know, for folks to get a chance to read the article in ESPN about, you know, Coach K's career, which is a fascinating article, to talk about the system that they had. And even for a fan, for as long as me, I had no idea of how intense and berating this particular fellow was and is to his players.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Like, I had no idea. Like, we told Jason Tatum he should just quit now and go to the NBA since that's the only reason he was there. And him and JJ Redick had a laugh over the PTSD they have with Mike Krzyzewski, right? Like deep shit.
Yeah.
So it's also this idea, and while we're talking about, oh, Coach K is like, he's the white coach who doesn't want certain people. At the same time, he's like this intensely, you know, belligerent dude for being, you know, in a way that, again, we didn't really know, right? And even the relationship between him and Bob Knight, which is fascinating because Bob Knight was his coach and his peer. And then they, in 92, because of after a game, they basically never were friends again. 92, Bob Knight had someone else give him a letter, which basically berated him, the program, and they essentially, besides obligatory, perfunctory, like handshakes, never talked again.
Or it's the Wright Thompson joint.
Yep.
Or yeah, and that's why one of the things I did want to get to, because within all this and the social stuff, there's a reality of like what coaching is, right, and how, you know, in sports, but you know, now in our world, in our modern world, you know, there's people that are life coaches. There's all kinds of people that do like various forms of stuff that that is characterized within the framework of like supporting a person to do a thing, right? But there's something about like the styles of what is permissible, what is expected, like what does it mean to be on a team? And if you've never been coached, like, and like, especially if you've never been on a sports team, your kind of perception of like how people can talk to you and what's normal, like there is a whole like psychological thing that's like, that coach has, you know, there's like a quasi parent like aspect to it, You know what I'm saying? We discussed when we talked about John Thompson, sort of the premium that he put in on, and he spoke of about his role in helping those young men become men, right? And sort
Yes,
of
sir.
like
Yes, sir.
in that like an obligation, and even that we also talked about sort of like that generation of black coaches who like openly, like we all openly talked about things that way, and we also acknowledged like the the specific value, in terms of black men in those roles in coaching spaces. But then also, and you'll find this, like the role, coaches kind of, even in a way more than like when you may have a teacher or someone who impacted you heavily. But you go to Duke and play for a coach like Coach K, that, whatever wild stuff he be saying to you and stuff, he's trying to push your buttons and they're trying to motivate you and they're trying to do all these things. Um, it's like players don't always talk about it in great detail, but they do sometimes, now probably more than in the past. And it's not just dismissed out of turn. If whatever they're saying is not necessarily like to be negative, but in the past, it's always seemed like, especially when we were young, like if a player spoke of anything a coach said to them that could be in any way construed as negative, it was like, oh, he's just not tough. You know what I'm saying? Don't bring it up. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like, the old, like as males, like, pack all that emotion and thought down deep into your pancreas and don't bring it out. Save that for later. like,
Just, you are something else.
don't tell nobody how you're feeling. You know what I'm saying? Just squeeze that down,
Yeah.
squish it inside. You know what I'm saying? Be a
So
real man. But
I want to touch on that because I think it swings two ways. I think to your point, there is part of that we did that I think today people would see differently, right? The other part is that coaches today, and I think it lends itself to your question earlier, coaches today to me aren't really coaches. They're like mentors. They're like intermediaries before you go somewhere else. They're like between your high school coach and your pro coach.
Right.
Because you're not you're not there long enough.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said, not just in this broader young people shouldn't go get paid. That's not nothing about that. Get paid. Where's the young Dolph? Get paid, man. Get paid. But like there's something to be said where you as a young person, a 17-year-old young person who, depending on your life experiences, you don't have that much to pull from. And you're about to go to a situation where you're one of the 200 or however, 12 players, 25 teams, whatever the numbers, the 300, 400 best basketball players on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that you don't need any help getting from being a really good a really good high school player to being one of the 400 best players in the world.
Right.
It's like,
definitely specious at best.
Yeah, like that argument. Like the argument now that you don't need that. So as a result, the Dean Smiths, I mean, the jury's out on Bob Knight for me still. I gotta maybe read the biography or something. But like the Dean Smith, the Coach K's, the John Thompsons, John Chaney's, I think Calipari is actually one of the first ones. He's just a mentor. He's not really, I can say he's not coaching, but I just think this idea, Nolan Richardson, right, out of Arkansas, this idea that you just need a mentor. You just need someone to give you the ball so that you can show your skills for 2 years.
Yeah. And that is just all X's and O's. It's all like, here's how you do a good screen.
Get a kid a chance to show his talents and then let him go to the league. I think there's something lost in that, both in the maturity of NBA basketball players, frankly, as well as their talent. I think their talent takes longer to mature, except for the ones who are so good. So I think we base this whole idea of you don't need college basketball, and college basketball is just this intermediary caretaker space for a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
We do it because of like LeBron and Kevin Garnett. So we're using like the two and Kobe Bryant, right? We're using like the 3 of the 75 best basketball players ever, right?
Right.
To prove the point why you don't need college.
Right. it's actually still the ongoing, probably most remarkable thing about LeBron, especially based on what we know, that he, whatever happened, that he, found the you in the 80s and 90s, dudes with his profile, we'd be like, it ain't gonna work out. Like something's gonna
Right.
happen. Like, but then the base, the whole idea, like it goes, it speaks to sort of like, I mean, even the idea of like people that are open to coaching, because like there's some people, and I see this sometimes in principle, like people like they're not almost not open to feedback. Like they feel like they already know what they're doing and they just need you to sort of manage them in this other way. And it'd be like, yeah, but you might need some like, you might need some stuff that falls in these gray areas of perception and motivation and understanding of sort of, what your values are and integrity and develop like these other aspects they're definitely more personal, right? Um that were
Can I say this?
yeah.
There's something always to be said when you look at a team and you look at the amount of players from that team that become coaches,
Mm-hmm.
coaches or students of the basketball game in some capacity.
Yeah.
If you notice, say what you will, North Carolina produced coaches, right? Duke is currently in the space of producing coaches.
Yeah.
You really can't say that for a lot of colleges, that they now have produced coaches.
Yeah.
So it speaks to when you went and learned, when you played basketball at a high level, what did you learn? And then are you able to then teach other people that thing?
Yeah.
And I would argue college basketball suffers from not having people who are able to teach other people the thing.
Yeah.
Because now you don't have but so many people who know how to teach the thing, and they know how to teach the thing because of the team they work. I mean, the NFL is almost like the example of it to the extreme, where like all coaches come from 3 or 4 systems, right? All coaches come from Andy Reid and going up to what's his name from the 49ers. Oh man,
Bill Walsh.
Bill Walsh. Like everyone comes from them. Tony Dungy. You start looking around, you start being like, damn, okay, it's only like 3 family trees in this whole game now, right? But like, or Bill Belichick, right? For real. So, but the college basketball suffers on the other side, where it's like, okay, who's really a good coach versus who just gets people who want to come for 1 to 2 years, do a tune-up, and then go play basketball, and maybe depending on their talent, frankly, not be too good.
Yeah.
And I think Duke has suffered from a lot of guys who stayed 1 or 2 years that I would argue could have been really good basketball players who are okay basketball players.
Right. Like, he's solid player. Solid
Jabari
NBA
Parker
guy
is an example of a kid who I would argue could have been really good. He is still in the NBA. He is a good basketball player. He's one of the 400 best, so I get it. But he could have been really good. But again, the guys only want to stay 1 to 2 years. So I think Duke had to then adjust to the world of guys who they're only going to stay 2 years. So you try to give them the best coaching possible in the 2 years, actually coach them, right? So that they can go and be successful. And I think we've, using the examples of LeBron, Kobe, Kevin Garnett, and LeBron, we've essentially largely abandoned this idea of needing coaching, which then in the NBA shows up, I think, in a lot of different ways.
Well, I mean, to me, quite frankly, it shows up to me. I'm a firm advocate of the idea that like at some point, no matter how good your ability to play basketball, you need to share some of the load of like how we're doing all this with someone else. How I feel about the idea of talent, and that people think of talent as some magical level of giving ability, and then you just like I don't think that's not what, to me, talent is developed. Like you learned something and then you kept building on it. And there's this treatment of sort of like, oh, well, the size and the power and all the stuff that basically you'll just figure it out and just be better than people just because just because of like you just happen to be that way. And it's like, no, it seems like all the best players in all the sports, like they have the right balance between whatever their physical gifts and attributes are, their training and work, their study of the game, study of the sport they play, and especially in basketball. And it shows in, I mean, look, I'm just saying what's happening with the Lakers right now.
Woo!
Russ, he's a fantastic athlete. He works hard, all the other stuff, but he does not seem to be able to play any other way, no matter who, and I don't think it's ill will or nothing. He just can't play another way. Right. He just can't stop doing it. And there's it goes back to my first thing where I say KD was right. And then the other aspect that there's always other factors with success in a sport, right? And it's in a way it's a testament like to somebody like Coach K to continue to be competitive, like and not basically like I would say, I mean maybe up to when was the last time Syracuse was really in the mix, like to get they had almost had a breakthrough squad a couple years ago, right?
Like they were like, I think it was like when they had Johnny Flynn, when they had the Upstate Boys, when they had Johnny Flynn, they had McNamara, they had the sharpshooters. They had maybe, I guess that was, I might be like 2010, 2011. Yeah. It's been a while.
I'm just looking at it like I think Jim Boeheim is still the head coach.
But he's about to retire. But yeah,
it's a wrap, Jim. Like in terms of like y'all winning at the highest level, like it's, I mean, like it ends. It comes for everyone, right? And Coach K had found a way to keep those teams competitive, and there's somewhere in there that and even Calipari's sort of second act, with Kentucky, we're figuring out how to do the like, look, y'all gonna be here for a couple of years. We're going to make sure you learn a couple things. You got to get ready to go to the next level. But I'm not, whatever.
Yeah, he's a charm school. Calipari is like a charm school for like really good basketball players. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like you're going to learn a couple things here to be able to get on stage. And I'm not knocking that because I guess, again, we're in a space that the world is different. Yeah. So I don't want to try to keep the world of college basketball the same when everything else in the world has changed, right? Yeah. To your point, the teams that were traditionally good when we were of a certain age aren't generally any good anymore, right? The UCLA teams, Arizona jumps in and out. Gonzaga now is like consistently good. Mm. Baylor is now consistently good, right? Mm-hmm. I think, it'd be interesting to find to look deeper into like how Baylor started recruiting kids and like why are the kids going to Baylor and where were they going before?
Yeah.
Because that's what makes me like, okay, where were these guys going? Because no knock to anybody with Baylor, nothing strikes me as that you have particularly like skilled coaches or people are like, man, this is the X and O guy from up above, right? So, why are you going there? And then it made, you actually brought up a very good point about pro basketball. In that, I mean, if you look at pro basketball right now, if you think about the amount of coaches that stick out to you as far as like good coaches, Spoelstra. I mean, I'm saying, I'm just putting it out to like, I mean, Spoelstra's a good coach. Because they're still good, right? Yeah. They don't have any of the people he had 10, 12 years ago.
Right.
And they're still good.
Yeah.
And it's still good, right? So say what you will, he is clearly a top tier coach.
Yeah.
But like, what other coaches come to mind? It's like, we all sometimes Tom Thibodeau is like good and then he's not, right? Like depending on the year. Some years Tom Thibodeau is the coach of the year. We all, he dresses everybody down. He's, make them all.
I think Ty Lue is a good coach. Because they shouldn't be competitive. now.
No,
right.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. No,
I always
right.
that Nick Nurse in Toronto. I give Nick Nurse his props. I think Nick Nurse is
yes, Nick Nurse is a good coach. And I think Jason Kidd, I mean, frankly, where LA made their biggest mistake was losing Jason Kidd.
Yeah, probably.
Because, Jason Kidd will be a good coach in years to come, right? Like, because of his vision of the game and his knowledge of the game, teams will always want a Jason Kidd to be working with their star player.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think and one more thing about Coach K, it's also, if you think about him, what college coach was able to actually coach pros and then go back to coaching college?
Yeah, it's not a lot of that.
It's
That
not a
was
lot.
and pro players really, seemed at least to respect them. Like they seem
Right.
to, get something basketball, you know what I'm saying, from him.
Right. The dream team in 92 was coached by Chuck Daly, right?
Right.
Like, it was coached by the epitome of a pro basketball coach. And then we have this idea of being coached by, by this seminal coach out of Chicago. So yeah, I think it's an end of an era in a lot of different ways. Duke has, kind of spawned a fair amount of college coaches, as well as folks who are involved within pro basketball and other places. So it'll be interesting to see, kind of what emerges out of that, because I would argue that Coach K was like the leaf or the branch of the Bobby Knight tree that even makes anyone still remember Bobby Knight, right? Like, depending on your history and your age, you can forget Bobby Knight ever existed. You can forget that Indiana was ever good.
Oh yeah. That is a total object of a previous generation, I think, to probably like Bobby Knight I don't think play anybody. I mean, unless you just a nerd of the game, I doubt the casual college basketball fan that's under 30 would be like Bobby Knight. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it would be like just some, you'd be like, you would bring it up, shit almost. You might know more about John Wooden than Bobby Knight. You know what I mean? Just because you'd be like, oh, John Wooden, 60s. Like,
Right.
I heard about the Wooden way. I watched Billions. You know what I'm saying? like I watched Billions. They were talking about John Wooden on there. You know what I'm saying?
That's it. Yeah. That, you know what? And one thing that's interesting now that you say that is that, the actual good coaches of the 70s have been all, frankly, but obscured. In the 80s, you really have Dean Smith, Coach K, Denny Crum was good for a while, right? So you just have different coaches, but like, I think it's a testament to another age of basketball, and I think there were pros and obviously some challenges to that age. But I definitely think when you look at today's NBA, the benefit of actual coaching, and now whether you call that in high school, college, and or professional basketball, or the G League, as it were now, right? The role of not just a mentor and not just a modeling school, but an actual coach that's going to, one, help you be a better human being, help you navigate the world you're about to go into. I think a lot of NBA players still are having challenges navigating the world they find themselves in. And that plays out in a lot of different ways. And, the idea of a system, right?
Yeah.
We romanticize the destruction of systems or the obliteration of systems versus the creation of systems.
Yeah.
So I think that the Duke in the Coach K way, it'll be interesting to see how it lives on post, his
and did they say who's taking over for him?
John Shire.
Okay.
Yeah, Shire's taking over. I wasn't going to buy the biography, but now I have to buy the biography because, there's supposed to be a whole bunch of tension between Amaker coming back and Shire, and, again, in any family, there's family drama, right? So Coach, Shire was Coach K's hand-picked successor, which I'm sure for the administration of Duke University was a challenge when the person that's brought the most attention to your school ever says, this is the guy I want. but some other people might want another guy, maybe. And but Tommy, I mean, I think as I recall, Amaker's at Harvard, and they're doing quite well. But yeah, I mean, you have Amaker, you have Dawkins, you have Chris Collins, you have Bob Hurley, or Arizona State. Yeah, the coaches, they're all over. Capel at Pitt, they're all over.
That's right. I forgot. Let's go Panthers.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. They got mollywopped by Duke the other night.
It does belong in the ACC, but it's fine.
Well, that's
not that I know where else to put them.
Other thing.
I don't know where else for them to go, but yeah,
that's the other thing that I think basketball has been challenged with, like the idea of what you're going to go do. I think, call it what you will. When you went to Duke, you knew you were going to play UNC. You knew you were going to play in the Cameron Indoor Stadium. You knew you were going to play in the ACC tournament in Greensboro, and all that up until a certain time that actually meant, right? Like you could play a Wake Forest team and lose, right? Yeah. Like you could play a team and lose, right? You may play Virginia in the finals, and it's going to be a hard game, right? And I think that with the obliteration of the kind of conferences and what those things mean, I went to see a Duquesne game the other day, and Duquesne now, they're Loyola from Chicago is actually going to be a member of the A10. So now the A10 essentially goes from the East Coast to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like, so the idea back in the day when like the A10 tournament was held in Atlantic City, right? And like everybody
was.
The A10 tournament was held in Atlantic City. Like, and what that meant, right? And what it meant to a player playing, right? To the actually appreciating tradition starting in, if you had it in high school, but definitely in college. I think that there's a part of all of that that's making it a little more difficult for players, for fans, frankly, and even players to establish that. So,
all right. Well, the only thing I say in closing, like it is, I don't know if we'll have any coach in college, like let's at a major, maybe at like a big college, at like the top of the, I'm sure like smaller schools, D3 schools, D2 schools, even lower profile D1 schools, you'll have coaches who'll be there for multiple decades. I think that'll still happen. I don't know if we'll get too many of them. I just feel like the world is different on that now. And even if someone is really, really, really good, that they might get shots to move to other places, or just might, I just don't think I don't think those institutions function that way anymore, where that sort of like, he's been here for 15 years and he's a part, basically he's a part of the culture of this place. I don't know if that's still a concept that we largely invest in as a society anymore, but maybe I'm wrong, but man, hats off to Coach K, even if he, like I said, they killed the dream, what I'm saying, beating that UNLV team and getting in the way to, I mean, I don't want to take it personal, what I'm saying, it wasn't about me, what I'm saying, it was just basketball.
like everything in America, it was about race and class. We just didn't know, right? Like that's the thing I take from it. Like in finality for me is just like how much you realize the things you think you're thinking that original thoughts are actually being, not to sound like KRS-One or something here, or like some sort of conspiracy theorist or, Bobby Hemmett, but right. like you were programmed, right? Yeah. You were programmed to see these people through a lens. And since you saw them through the lens, that's what it was to you, versus it was more nuance and complexity than we accepted at that time. So, as a Duke fan, I'm you got to be careful about nostalgia and being sad to see somebody go, especially when they're 70-something years old and like having light strokes on, when he just had to leave at halftime. Like it's time to go. Like, you want to keep years of your life, right? So I think, especially when families have given members of their family to the rest of us for 40 years.
Yeah, like those.
In the ways that when that happens, when you're one of the best coaches in the world, the ability to appreciate and have that time is important. So, it just for me is for everyone thinking about basketball and thinking about those kind of things, that as eras change, how do you keep the best part of what happened before without falling into the nostalgia of wanting that actual thing,
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think we can just wrap it up. We'll add on about some of these other things next time we build. So, unless you got anything else with that, I say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Thank you for tuning in. And as things roll and move forward, keep listening and sharing. And I am, this is not a hollow, proclamation. More recordings and conversations to come. So, as always, you can support the podcast by sharing, by going on to wherever you listen and giving a rating. Ratings matter. Tell a friend. You can also support this financially by searching up the Etsy shop, buy a sweatshirt or a mug. You can also just look up Justice Rajee on Patreon and subscribe. Every little bit counts to offset the monthly cost of keeping the digital audio on the internets. As it were, the internet is actually not free. It's only free sometimes to the user, but as we know, even that is not really free. So, in any event, man, I'm gonna get out of here. And if you enjoy, again, tell a friend and share far and wide. So with that, I'm gonna say peace.